Greetings from Tokyo. I'm Trip, and welcome to the Hammer of Wrath. This week, you and I are going to continue the Summer of the Wolf by tackling our Wolfguard Head Takers. Let's go. Thanks for joining me in the studio. This week, you and I are going to continue our journey through the Summer of the Wolf by tackling the Wolfguard Head Takers and their accompanying pups. If you missed the previous video where we completed our first squad from the new Space Wolves army box with the blood claws, you can find that video linked here. But before we get started today, I want to talk very briefly about a few things that are different in Japan. Now, of course, there are going to be many things about Japanese culture that are vastly different from the way things are done in the West. Now, there is one thing that in the grand scheme of things is rather inconsequential, but has always rubbed me the wrong way. And the first few times it occurred to me, it really caught me off guard. For as polite and well-mannered as Japanese society can be, holding the door open for someone else as you enter or leave a shop is just not a thing here. And after I first arrived, on more than one occasion, I can tell you that as I was following someone into a store, the door would just come back and sort of hit me. But I've since realized that even if someone sees you walking in behind them, they won't hold the door open for you. Now, in the reverse, because I was raised in the West and that is the common custom, if I am entering or leaving a business and I see someone just a few steps behind me, I always stop to hold the door open for them, and it often gets a strange look. Now, of course, they are polite and thank you as they pass by, but you can tell that you've caught them off guard and your behavior is completely unexpected. Well, that's enough about strange differences in Japanese and Western culture and how they can catch you off guard. Let's talk about the Wolfguard Head Taker. As we work our way through the Space Wolves army set, we move next to the Head Takers, and this squad of 3 elite troops was a total blast to build and paint. We've done some customization along the way, so let me show you how I built, customized, and painted my Wolfguard Head Takers. The kit contains 2 small sprues that include the parts for 3 head takers and 3 pack wolves. We set about making the head takers by snipping out our parts, and we're going to be swapping out the axes for something a little more space wolfy using these bits from Grey Tide Studios. As usual, we're going to use Tamiya Thin in order to assemble our models. It's a really great plastic cement, and the precision applicator makes everything easy. Specifically in this case, once we join the 2 halves of the torso, we're going to use that applicator to run a fine line of the cement along the seam in order to weld it more closely together and hide that. Now, once we have our miniatures assembled, we're going to swap out the weapons. In this case, you can build this kit one of 2 ways. 1 with a power weapon and a storm shield, or 2 with dual weapons. Unfortunately, though, in the kit, it's an axe and a sword, and that just doesn't sit right with me. They're space Vikings. Why aren't they dual-wielding axes? So again, we're going to use those Grey Tide Studio bits here that are resin-printed parts, and we're going to super glue them onto the model. I've printed a pair of matching wolf head axes here in resin by simply mirroring the design in the print bed, and as you can see, it looks really great. With our new weapons swapped in, it's time to start priming. Here, as always, Vallejo polyurethane primer through the airbrush. We'll do a top-down white zenithal to help describe our shapes, and then on to our famous Space Wolves formula. Here we're using somber gray from Vallejo, but the Fang will work from Games Workshop. We spray that from underneath. And then over top, a mix, 5 parts Fenrisian gray, 1 part electric blue from Vallejo, and then a final top-down only zenithal of just Fenrisian gray. Now, once that's set, we're going to go ahead and apply Space Wolves contrast, but we're going to mix it 2-to-1 with our contrast medium. That's 2 parts contrast medium, 1 part paint. You'll see it flows over all the recesses and fills in our details. Now, once that's completely dry, about 30 minutes, we're going to do a very light dry brush of Fenrisian Gray across the model to bring out our highlights and edges. Now, using the airbrush here along the bottom of the greaves, I'm applying a very subtle gradient of Space Wolves Gray contrast straight out of the pot. And on the pauldrons, there's a bit of that iconic Space Wolves yellow peeking out from underneath the fur pelts. So we'll go ahead and paint that in. And in this case, on the pack leader, we've also done the right knee pad where we'll put some heraldry later on. Once we have a few coats of Uriel yellow down, we'll go ahead and shade the recesses with Reichland Flesh Shade. And with all the armor colors laid in, it is time for some sponge chipping. Here I'm using an old sink sponge and some burnt umber to carefully work my way around the model and add weathering in a really fast and easy manner. It's easy to overdo this, so use some restraint. Now on to the pelts. I want to separate each of these models, so I'm going to use a couple different colors here. Here I'm laying down some Vallejo khaki over top of this pelt, and on the pack leader I'm going to use a light gray from Army Painter. And then once we have our fur colors in, I'm going to start laying in some flesh tones for the leather or the unfinished pelts that are underneath. Once those base colors are laid in, we're going to use Mournfang Brown from Games Workshop for all the leather holsters. And here I'm using Lead Belcher on all the blades of the weapons. Great paint, goes on in a single coat, an absolute essential. Now, one of the other signature elements in my Space Wolves army is that there is no pure golds. Here I'm using Warplock Bronze. We'll lay that down as a base, and then later on we're going to weather everything. There's not a lot of ornamentation on these guys, but where it is, we do want to make it pop in sort of a Bronze Age way. Some of these axes are really great. These have some skulls on top of them, so we'll use Contrast Skeleton Horde to shade those, and the leather straps are being shaded with another contrast paint. This is called Wildwood. Next, we're going to use a Athonian Camo Shade, this is a wash from Games Workshop, in order to shade and patina all of our bronzes. We're going to do 2 coats here. You're going to apply 1 coat, let it fully dry, apply a second coat. That's going to allow the greens to come out and add that patina effect. Now along the pelts here, we're using Agrax Earthshade, but it is mixed 1-to-1 with Lamian Medium. It's too potent directly out of the pot, so we want to cut that, and we're going to do the same thing here on the gray pelt, but we're going to be using Nuln Oil and a Lamian Medium mix. Now once that's dry, we'll apply the shade, in this case Agrax, straight out of the pot. You see the difference here, but we want to create a gradient in the fur. Now once I've put that in, I'm going to feather the edge out using a little bit of water on a clean brush to draw it down in. Here on the leather of the pelt, I'm going to be using some Army Painter paints. This is Topaz Skin and Barbarian Flesh. I'll just work my way up to some highlights along the ridges and folds of that pelt. Once we're happy with how that's looking, we're going to go ahead and move on to the shading on this one. I'm going to turn it upside down so that gravity does some work for us here, and I'm using Contrast Basilicanum Gray. This is straight out of the pot. We're going to make this sort of darker gradient along the bottom. Now here on the brown pelt, we're going to do the same thing, only using Contrast Wildwood. We want the darkest parts to be there, so we'll go ahead and apply that in, and then feather it out to create a gradient. The last step on these pelts is going to be a dry brush. Here I'm using white, and I'm just going to give it a very light dry brush in order to bring out some highlights and add some additional contrast. It's time to highlight our bronzes. In this case, I'm using Canoptic Alloy. It's a really great metallic paint from Games Workshop. It's more of a lighter silver color, but it has a very subtle copper hue to it. It's slightly warm, so it makes a perfect highlight for all of these bronzes. We'll just work our way around the model, hitting what would be the highest edges of all the shapes in order to increase their contrast and visual interest. Now, great models deserve great bases. These are from Grey Tide Studios. They're part of the Primal Hounds pack. They come with a lot of different Celtic designs, and I've printed them out. We put a simple gradient on them with the airbrush. Then we'll use some Nuln Oil straight out of the pot to get our recesses and shadows. And once that's dry, pure white, dry brushed very quickly in order to bring out the highlights and edges. Because we've hot glued our models to these temporary bases, we'll just pop them off, apply some super glue gel type. We're using gel type here in order to fill in some of the surface imperfections and, sort of little nooks and crannies to make sure the model sticks. Now let's paint our shields. I know we built these guys with dual weapons, but let's try and have our cake and eat it too. We can paint these, attach them to their backpacks, and that way the model can technically be WYSIWYG, but we can change our loadout and let our opponent know before the game starts. Here I've applied a pink shadow spray. This is an old airbrusher's trick. It works great for Imperial Fists. You might see that in this video here. And then we'll apply some Uriel yellow over top, get some really good gold and amber hues. And then we'll pop those off, put them on some temporary painting handles, and work our bronzes around the models. Here, it's just a matter of patience. You got to go through and apply them very carefully so as not to ruin your yellow gradient. And then we'll go through and start shading the smaller details like the carved in runes. And again, we're going to apply that Athonian camo shade to our bronzes in order to give them a patina. Now along the topmost edges, in order to bring out our highlights and exaggerate the gold reflections and shapes, again, Canoptic alloy. I love this combo. I think it works really well. The paints really complement each other. We've chipped up the armor on our Space Marines, and of course the shield would be no exception. In fact, I would probably have more chipping, so we'll go through very carefully with a 000 brush and add some burnt umber chipping and scratches to these shields. And the pack leader has been modeled with only one weapon, so we'll go ahead and use some Revell Contact Pro and glue the shield to his left hand. Elite characters deserve elite power packs, and the very plain ones that come in the kit are an absolute misstep by Games Workshop. Why these guys don't have wolf heads on the power exhausts, I will never know. So we're going to take some bits from Grey Tide Studios. They have some really great power packs and other additional decoration bits, and we're going to make an amazing kit bash in 3D. This is something that a Wolfguard Head Taker should wear. We'll print that out, paint it up with our Space Wolves recipe, and then start working on all that ornamentation in our bronzes. Here, I've also got this really great decoration from the Grey Tide Studios pack that I think is much more fitting than the Iron Halo that's included in the official kit. Now, once we have our base colors down on that, we'll use some super glue gel type in order to mount that, and then we'll go ahead and start weathering our golds as we have done on every other part of the model that has it. We'll put down that Athonian camo shade. Once that's dry, we'll go through and highlight everything with Canoptic alloy. It makes everything pop. It looks fantastic. And then here, we're gonna use some super glue, a little ball of green stuff, and then we'll just put some more super glue on top of that, smush that down onto the power pack. It hides the join perfectly, and once it's in place, it'll be permanently attached. It looks cool. Rule of cool always wins, and in this case, the model is technically WYSIWYG, or what you see is what you get when you play, no matter which loadout you choose. I always paint my heads separately. Here I've hot glued them onto a piece of extra sprue, and we're just going to use Cadian Flesh Tone as our base layer, and then some light elf flesh from Vallejo over top from the airbrush. Makes everything look a little too pale, but then we'll go through with Reikland Flesh Shade straight out of the pot. We'll apply that carefully to the surfaces of the model, controlling where it flows, start to bring out the shadow values in our faces. Once we have our skin tones where we want them, we're going to go ahead and start painting our hair. Here I'm going to use a selection of sandy browns and oranges in order to create some different values. Once we have those down, we're going to go ahead and shade those. Here on the red, we're going to use Reikland Flesh Shade. That's going to keep it red and really warm. Once the details are complete, the heads twist off the sprue without much effort, and we're going to use a drop of Revell Contact Pro in order to secure plastic to plastic here through a couple layers of paint. It's just a matter of applying it carefully with the applicator, placing the head, and then you get several seconds of working time here before it really starts to bond. You can pose the head however you like. Now, we ran into a bit of a problem on this last one. I guess he's meant only to look to the right, because when I tried to make him look to the left, his ponytail conflicted with the pelt. So we'll go ahead and pull that off before the glue fully sets. Use our single-sided nippers to get a really clean and precise cut. We just want to trim like 1.5 millimeters off there. Place the head back in, and now he can turn to the left, and he looks none the worse for the wear. And as a final touch, we'll apply Valhalla Blizzard on the base. This is another signature of my army. We want that cold, Viking, Nordic aesthetic. So this is a really fun technical paint from Games Workshop. But we're not done. It's time for puppers. That's right. We've got to build and paint these wolves.
Do you like dogs?
Dogs.
What?
Yeah, dogs.
Dogs. You like dogs?
Oh, dogs.
As mentioned, the kit also comes with 3 pack wolves, and we're going to take some time to assemble and paint those in order to finish off the squad. The poses are really dynamic, and the kit's actually very well designed, and when you put the limbs together, it sort of hides the seams within the fur of the pelt. So we'll go ahead and put a black prime on those, a white zenithal, and then we're going to mix these up just like we did the pelts on the head takers themselves. Here we'll do a tan undercoat on 2 of them, and then on the third we're going to do a light gray undercoat. And then over top, using the airbrush, we're just going to do a gradient. This is Sandy Brown from Vallejo, and then we're going to use Army Painter Oak Brown on the second one. We want a little visual differentiation here. One of them should be a little more red. And on the third wolf, we're going to apply Mechanicus Standard Gray along the top. Once we've applied our gradients with the airbrush, we're going to go ahead and put our washes in. This is Agrax Earthshade mixed 1-to-1 with Lamian Medium for 2 reasons. 1, so that it flows better over the model and goes in between the fur sculpt, and 2, so that it's not too dark and contrasty, and you'll see why in just a moment. Same thing here on our third wolf, only we're using Nuln Oil instead of Agrax Earthshade. Now the trick when you're using a Lamian Medium mix, it makes it flow better, but you don't want it to pool up. So as we move into our lighter spaces, we just need to make sure we're moving it around with the brush to keep it from pooling. Now, next step, Agrax Earthshade straight out of the pot. You can see the difference here. When it's not cut with Lamian Medium, it's much darker, and the same can be said for Nuln Oil. We're going to do a stripe right down the back. If you look at photo reference of wolves, they often have a much darker stripe along the back. And then a third and final stripe on the brown wolves using that contrast wildwood. Once we've got that on, we'll clean our brush off and use a little water to sort of fade it in and create a gradation. The last step, once all of these are dry, is to take a light dry brush along the very top in order to bring out some contrast and highlights on the fur for additional visual interest. One of the last things we have to do is paint our gums and teeth. Here I'm using my 000 brush and my magnifying lenses to get in there and try and paint these tiny teeth one at a time. Again, these were on temporary basis. We'll take them off with a twist and using some super glue gel type, attach them to the resin bases. Here, I'll dab the model down a few times as I'm applying it to the base in order to activate the gel glue faster. And of course, as a final touch to our entire Space Wolves army, the pups are no different. Valhalla Blizzard for that cold Nordic vibe. And there you have it, one completed elite hunting unit for our growing Space Wolves army as we work our way through the brand new Space Wolves army set. I'm really excited to tackle the remaining units within this box, as well as the named characters that will be released in only a few short weeks. Well, I hope you enjoyed the video. It was my genuine pleasure to make and share it with you. If you'd like to support the channel, like, comment, and subscribe. Help drive us to the front page of YouTube as we approach 15,000 subscribers. Or you can always support the channel in other ways, like joining the Patreon linked in the description below. Joining at any level grants you access to our private Discord server where like-minded hobbyists help each other out every day with honest and kind feedback. Thanks again for joining me, and I'll see you in the next one.